And we're talking about Eila Mateo, and that is also a very obvious question. The question is, how is it when there were 10 lights, revelations in one vessel, it managed? When there were 10 vessels in 10 different, 10 revelations in 10 vessels, all of a sudden they just couldn't manage. How could it be? So the Baal HaTanya, Rav Shneimur Zalman of Liadi, asks the question. And he says, because the 10 revelations in one vessel were so closely connected to the infinite revelation that they were completely committed to the desire and will of the infinite, of the Almighty. On the other hand, the others that were already at a distance, in a certain sense, they already existed as separate entities, and therefore everyone was, as a certain expression, everyone made Shabbos for themselves. Everyone existed in their own world. In their own framework. So this brought about the collapse. And actually another thing that you also mentioned, if it's considered correction or not, there is an interesting word, which the Rebbe mentions it in his talks, that Eila Mateo was considered a break for the purpose of correcting. Shvira al menas tikun. It is like tearing something for the purpose of resewing it. And according to Halacha Shabbos, it's an halachic implication which makes a difference if it's just tearing for the sake of tearing. So here, this was also a purpose. This idea of Teyu was a purpose that later it's to introduce the next world.
So it's interesting because this is one of the things maybe that distinguishes how we understand Olam HaTohu, how different, how we approach. Is Olam HaTohu really, in a sense, a negative place?
Yeah.
And on the other hand, we say the light is so great, and even the vessels that fell in the Shvira, and it's not the light itself, it's just a little bit of the light that got attached to the vessels. The major light actually was elevated, went up, and it's only the lower vessels, it's not the higher vessels. The higher vessels only had a little bit of a pagam. They had something that was wrong, but it wasn't a full misa, it wasn't a full death, so to speak. Yet, we find this, like when we want to tell somebody to be like really powerful, we say, but yet in a contained way, in a methodical way, we say, Oros to Tohu, B'Kelim B'Tikkun, you should have like this light of Tohu, this is much more powerful light, but you should integrate it in your life. You should have to hold on to it in the vessels of Tikkun. So, now, I understand we could say, on the one hand, we're saying that there was immaturity there, or there was single-mindedness that wasn't able to have compatibility and so on. On the other hand, we say it's so great. I'm just kind of reminded about something, again, to quote Ayin Beis, in honor of the 100th yahrzeit of, not the yahrzeit, it's not the yahrzeit of Ayin Beis. Not the yahrzeit, it's 100 years anniversary. That's the good, thank you.
It began on Shavuos, exactly.
It began on Shavuos, so it is right, it's right around now. So it is just about 100 years when the Rebbe Rashab said that, light in a vessel comes out of a number of things. It's based on the Ari, it explains what the Ari. A vessel comes out actually of something going in opposite directions. The Greeks called it a dialogue, a dialectic, which means, really, for lack of a better term, a machlokus, a discussion where two people argue about something, and from somebody on the right, somebody on the left, their clashing creates you mediate your opinion because you're aware somebody else has another opinion. So that once you know you're in an argument with somebody, that creates a third way. That's what the dialectic is. It's the thesis. This is all we learned in high school, but we forgot it already. There's a thesis, and there's the antithesis and the synthesis. So this is a Kabbalistic idea as well, meaning Hillel says one thing, Shammai says the opposite, and then they come to some synthesis, where they come to some middle ground. Maybe it's they. Sometimes Hillel goes back a little bit, Shammai goes back. They accept halacha. So that's the kalim. The kalim is or even when your opinion is tempered by the awareness that somebody has an opposite, an opposing viewpoint. But the Rebbe Rashab says there's something in the original, when you just give an opinion without anybody there to yet block you, that's much more powerful than when you're kind of holding back because you know there's somebody else there. So that could be like Olam HaTohu, could be before there was anybody there, before you were aware that there was going to be a machlokas. The machlokas is on the way, but when you think you can just get away with it, there's a certain strength in that. The thing is, there's no reconciliation. There's no accommodation. So maybe it is both. Maybe, in other words, anybody with a strong opinion could be symbolic of a connection that's in a way infinite, but it also can be problematic in that it doesn't make room. And in order for there to be a vessel, there has to be a back and forth. There has to be a giving in a little bit.
Right.
So it's maybe the tohu and the tikkun are more connected than we think. The idea of making a vessel comes in a sense, if we say akudim is the beginning of the vessel, but nikudim is the next stage of building a vessel. The shattered vessels become the actual things that contain the next. They're the things that contain what will come afterwards.
I mean, in we see it also in regards to the idea of peace. When it comes to peace, we need two different parties arguing, and in order to argue, then comes the third one and brings the solution.
Or we have Ad Sheva Shlishi, a Talmudic concept of a contradiction in biblical verses becomes resolved with the machriya, with the third intermediate. But the intermediary view is often the reality of when you are engaged in a debate. Eventually, you come to some consensus. Mm-hmm. That's the vessel,
right? And in addition to that, in order to make peace between two opposites, you also need. You would need to take from a higher level that's higher than both of them together. For example, when it comes to the two angels, Malach Michael, who's called in English Michael, and Malach Gavriel, these two angels who are in charge of two different emotions in camps, and one is 186,000 angels under him, another one has 151,000 angels under him, and they both represent the two different schools of thought, of teaching how to serve the Almighty, love affair. So both of them are screaming the opposites of the other one. One is screaming water, the other one is screaming fire. One is screaming snow, one is screaming fire. Then comes the Oise Shalom B'Mreimov, the Almighty. When they're both together in front of Him, that's when they both melt away. That they could unite because there is a superior over them which brings them together. So therefore, when it comes to we're speaking about the two, the bringing together Elam Mateo, and speaking about the negative light and the positive light. In the negative light, it's basically, and actually on one hand it seems negative, and on one hand it would feel positive. The Talmud tells us there was a certain sage, he was called Ben Azai. He was a person who never married, and he was completely like his whole interest was learning, studying Torah. And actually his name is quoted in the Jewish law in regards to how long a person has to wait to get married, unless he's like Ben Azai, that he's really nafshi choshka b'teira, he has a very strong interest in Torah. Ben Azai is considered like someone that's removed from world, not someone that's conducting a civilized life, a marriage, family, generations. This is basically Ben Azai. The same thing was the story with Nachshon ben Aminadav, Nadav Avihu. Nadav Avihu, the two sons of Aaron. They also went in, they brought an offering. Ashalit Tziva, that they weren't told to bring. They were not commanded to bring. And that was considered in the Eir HaChaim HaKadosh, who's one of the great commentaries, taters on the Chumash, says in the beginning of one of the Torah portions, I think it's Parsha Acharei, they had such a strong yearning to connect that they completely removed themselves from everything. And that coincides with a whole group of different explanations that our sages tell us what was their sin. It says one was they didn't go in with the right clothing. One was they didn't get married. One was they drank wine. All of them, as Hasidus explained, symbolize a person removing themselves from world.
Wow.
And so this is the union of Rotzi. It's called the Rotzi without a shuf. You have it also when they went into paradise, when they went into the paradise, into the garden, the four people, Rabbi Akiva and Ben Zim, all of them, they went in. Only one managed to get out in peace. Rabbi Akiva, Nichnas b'shalim, v'yotze b'shalim. He went in peace, he left in peace. So the Rebbe asked the question, what does it mean he went in peace and left him? How could he control what's going to be later? The answer is because in the beginning his intention was going in peace, which means peace means bringing a unity between the physical and the spiritual world. And not that one should contradict the other and one should not omit the other. And therefore when a person goes in with the intention that the main intention is this physical world, otherwise he would be an angel. He wouldn't be created as a person. So then he manages and he's successful to come out in peace as a soul in a body. So on one hand, it's a rotzi. It's a beautiful thing. It's connecting, clinging to a higher force. And that's basically the reason of learning Hasidus. The Rav Shneur Zalman of Liadi says there's 2 points in the studying of Hasidus. On one hand, if we study about the worlds and the godliness and the levels, it's something that picks us up to a higher world. It actually brings in a certain interest and an inspiration to wanting to connect to higher. On the other hand, Hasidus also concentrates on explaining different things in the world. That is what settles us back down, bringing out the uniqueness in this physical world. So therefore, when it comes to Elam Mateo, there are basically the idea of clinging to higher. On the other hand, it's also the yesh. The yesh is that everyone is an entity for himself. It's considered a self-interest. Everyone is a world for themselves. So therefore, it is basically the idea of positive but also negative. Or in another sense, we can say there's a difference between the revelation and the vessel. The vessel stood with their fullest strength and identification with their, and the revelation was basically clinging to higher, like a flame that wants to go back to its source.